All right, folks. Hey, everybody. So we're going to talk now about, we've talked about decision making um, quite a bit, but now just sort of comparing decision making, problem solving, and looking at some specific stepwise things that are recommended for decision making, usually in democratic groups, but yeah, other groups too. Okay, so first off, decision making versus problem solving. Like a lot of people ask me, like, what's the difference between those two? And decision making is making one choice among several alternatives, whereas problem solving is making a series of decisions. So basically, problem solving is just like a whole bunch of decisions, and decision making is making typically one choice among several alternatives. So, for example, let's say you're in a group and you're deciding on a pizza, and you have to decide uh, among various choices about the crust of the pizza. You can choose thick crust, thin crust, or deep dish. So thick crust, thin crust, or deep dish. The thick crust being, just sort of your standard average crust, perhaps maybe a little thicker. Thin crust, like super thin, or deep dish, which is really, um, totally different thing actually. So those are your choices, and so you have to choose one of those three for the pizza. So that would be decision making. Problem solving might be like you're in a group and everybody's hungry. That's huge. Now you have a lot of decisions to make. Like, should you eat in or out? If you're going to eat out, which restaurant will you pick? How will you get there? How are you going to split the meal? So that's it's a little bit different when you have a group that's hungry. So that's problem solving. Whole bunch of decisions basically. Hirokawa offered up his decision-making steps, which are steps that every group should take according to Hirokawa to make a good decision. The first one was to assess the present situation. The second one was to identify goals. The third was to identify several alternatives. Then the fourth was to evaluate positive and negative consequences of the alternatives, and finally to select the alternative. This seems like really obvious, like, of course, yeah. And so most people are like, Sammy, why? Uh, well, what Hirakawa was brilliant because he took common sense to higher ground, and so he was basically telling us to do things that we kind of know we all should do, but we kind of forget. So it was a reminder. So, for example, identifying several alternatives. A lot of times people will jump to, just looking at one or two choices and not really consider all the different alternatives that are out there. Positive and negative consequences. They don't consider the bad things that could happen with a particular idea or the good things that could happen. They just, go one or the other. Making a choice, I guess that's, you do need to do that too. But that other stuff, that's critical thinking, really looking at all the alternatives, considering other alternatives that might not seem obvious on the surface. Those are all parts of that. For problem solving, Hirakawa recommended, and these aren't necessarily in order, but they are: develop an accurate understanding of the problem, develop requirements for an acceptable choice, develop many alternatives, assess the positive features of each alternative, and assess the negative features of each alternative. That's for problem solving. Those were his suggestions. So yeah, so not too much stuff, but yeah, Hirakawa was kind of the guy because a lot of times groups, when they make really really bad decisions, for example, they won't consider the dangerous things of aspects of some of the things, or the bad things that could happen. They only look at what if everything worked out perfectly. So yeah. But yeah, let me know if you have any other questions about decision making. But that's kind of the distinction between decision making and problem solving, and then Hirakawa's suggestions about decision making and problem solving.